Today I'd like to talk about Mohammed Yunus and microcredit. Michael Yunus never intended to be a banker. He never intended to even lend money to people. He was a person who liked to find solutions to a problem. And when he found a solution, he wanted to eliminate the problem. What's surprising is, even to him in an interview, is that he's a creator of microcredit and the Grameen Bank. He's even today running Grameen cell phone company, which controls 63% of the market share in Bangladesh. If we look back, he started teaching not in Bangladesh, but in United States. He taught economics in the state of Tennessee. In 1971, Bangladesh, after a lot of bloodshed, a lot of tension, a lot of conflict, this country became independent. And it's at that time, the year of its independence, that he decided to return to teach economics. A little bit later on, 3 years later, in 1974, there was a huge famine. There were thousands, if not millions, of people going hungry. There was no food, and people were just getting thinner and thinner and finally dying. And at this moment, he was in a university teaching richer kids, richer students, the elegant theories of economics. And he did not like at all the irony of the great theories of economics, while thousands, if not millions, were dying in the streets. One day, just walking close to campus, university campus, he met a woman. She had really shabby, really poor clothes. And if you looked at her house behind her, where she was working, the house was falling apart and falling down into the ground. But he was really surprised by these beautiful bamboo stools that she was making. And he stopped and was in awe of the stools and started asking her questions. He asked her, how much did it cost? And how much money did she make in profit? And how did she market the stools? And she told him the story that she had no money for bamboo, so she would have to borrow money to make the stool. And the bamboo would cost her 25 cents for a stool. And because she didn't have the money, she had to borrow the money from a lender. And the deal was that the lender said, okay, I'll lend you the 25 cents for the stool, but afterwards you have to give me the stool. And he would tell her what the price of the stool was. And so when Mohammed Yunus asked her how much she made, he couldn't believe it that she was only making about 2 cents for a stool. The lender was not giving you the market price of the stool. He was determining it. And so Mohammed Yunus understood very quickly that this lender had made this woman into a slave. And this was shocking. The problem for him was overwhelming. It was difficult. And yet, he couldn't help thinking the solution was very simple. He determined, after walking around and finding out how many people in his small little area around where he worked, how many people owed money, he found that he could free 42 people with a little bit more than $25. And that's what he did. And they were so happy. And he couldn't believe how little he gave and how much that made so many people so happy. And that drove him to do something quite different than teaching. He started his own bank, which we talked today, as we've already said. He's won the Nobel Peace Prize. and he's running the Grameen Bank. It's certainly it's certainly a wonderful story about how sometimes solutions are simple, and they come from some simple, basic, common sense ideas. We see this story in Bangladesh, and quite often I think of microcredit as something that would be an idea for Bangladesh, countries in Africa, South America, etc. But even Quebec, which is certainly not a poor place, also has microfinancing. And I met some people a few years ago who worked for microfinance in Quebec, and they will give out loans that start, close to zero. But obviously, running a business is it's much less. But they would help, and they will help those people who have a great idea or want to run a business, who would never be considered by a bank. And loans start around, I said next to nothing, but around $5,000 and go up to as high as $40,000. And so there's an opportunity for people, if you ever know somebody who has a great idea, and they can't get accepted at a bank, that maybe they should accept microfinance in Quebec. You can just Google it. I do have one more question, though, and that's sort of bothering me about this sort of idea of being a slave. I think Quebecers really enjoy the opportunity to have a job, and they're happy to work, and they're even happier when it's a good job and good pay. And yet, Quebecers and Canadians have a very high debt load. In fact, if we look at it, each Canadian owes $21,000 each for consumer debt in 2014. And so the question is, we're certainly not like the lender worker where we're paying 2 cents or $1 for a day's work, but we seem to be enslaving ourselves. We seem to be in a consumer society where our need and desire for new cars and iPads and smartphones and going out to restaurants and going to the beach in the Caribbean every year have brought us to a point where we're working to pay our lenders, which are basically or essentially Visa and MasterCard. So the question is, are we slaves? Perhaps we decided to be those slaves to Visa and MasterCard through our behavior. And finally, can we break that behavior so that we can free ourselves to make real choices where we are actually free to make decisions rather than ending up each pay with a couple cents left after we pay our consumer debt off. I'll end with that. You can listen to this little excerpt over and over again for the next 20 minutes, and good luck. Bye. Today I'd like to talk about Mohammed Yunus and microcredit. Michael Yunus never intended to be a banker. He never intended to even lend money to people. He was a person who liked to find solutions to a problem. And when he found a solution, he wanted to eliminate the problem. What's surprising is, even to him in an interview, is that he's the creator of microcredit and the Grameen Bank. He's even today running Grameen cell phone company, which controls 63% of the market share in Bangladesh. If we look back, he started teaching not in Bangladesh, but in United States. He taught economics in the state of Tennessee. In 1971, Bangladesh, after a lot of bloodshed, a lot of tension, a lot of conflict. This country became independent. And it's at that time, the year of its independence, that he decided to return to teach economics. A little bit later on, 3 years later, in 1974, there was a huge famine. There were thousands, if not millions, of people going hungry. There was no food. And